The crisp autumn air settled over a quiet neighborhood in Cedarwood, Pennsylvania. The Harper household was warm and inviting, the soft hum of a ceiling fan mingling with the faint rustle of leaves outside in the nursery. Baby Maya, only 3 months old, slept soundly in her crib. Her tiny breaths were steady, her little fist clutching a stuffed bear. Downstairs, Jonathan Harper, a 32-year-old software engineer, was hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table. The faint glow of code reflected off his glasses, his focus sharp despite the late hour. John, his wife Emily, called softly as she stepped into the room, holding a cup of chamomile tea. "You should check on Maximum. He's been acting strange again." Max, their 5-year-old golden retriever, had been a part of the family since they adopted him from a rescue shelter. Loyal and gentle, he had always been protective of Mia, but for the past 2 weeks his behavior had shifted. Every night he would sit by Mia's crib, his ears perked, his eyes locked on the far corner of the room. Jonathan sighed, rubbing his temples. Strange how Emily hesitated, her brow furrowed. He was growling again, John, low and steady, like his warning us about something. Jonathan pushed his chair back, rising with a groan. "All right, I'll check on him." The nursery was dimly lit, the soft glow of a nightlight casting shadows on the walls. Max stood rigid next to the crib, his golden fur bristling as he growled softly, his gaze fixed on the corner of the room. "Max, what is it, boy?" Jonathan asked, kneeling beside him. He ran a hand over the dog's fur, feeling the tension beneath his touch. Max's growl deepened, his ears twitching. Jonathan followed the dog's gaze, but saw nothing out of the ordinary, just the nursery wall adorned with pastel wallpaper. Emily appeared in the doorway, her arms crossed. "What's wrong with him, John? He's never been like this before." Jonathan shook his head. "I don't know, maybe he picking up on something we can't." The couple stayed in the nursery for a while, watching Max as he eventually settled down, but even as they returned to bed, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. That night he lay awake, his mind racing with questions. Was Max trying to warn them, or was it just the odd behavior of an overprotective dog? The next morning, Emily called Dr. Thompson, the family's trusted veterinarian. "Max has been growling at the same corner in Mia's room every night," she explained over the phone. "It's like he's trying to protect her, but from what we don't know." Dr. Thompson listened intently before responding. "Dogs have heightened senses. He might be hearing or smelling something. You can't bring him in this afternoon, and I'll take a look later." That day, Jonathan and Emily loaded Max into their SUV and drove to Dr. Thompson's clinic. The familiar scent of antiseptic and the soft sounds of animals greeted them as they entered the cozy space. Dr. Thompson, a kind man in his 50s with a calming presence, greeted Max with a pat on the head. "All right, big guy. Let's see what's going on." The examination was thorough. Dr. Thompson checked Max's ears, eyes, and overall health. Finally, he sat down with the Harpers. "Physically, Max is in excellent shape. There's no sign of illness or discomfort that could explain his behavior." Jonathan frowned. "So what's causing it? He's never acted like this before." Dr. Thompson stroked his chin thoughtfully. "It could be environmental. Dogs are incredibly attuned to changes in their surroundings. He might be reacting to a sound, smell, or even vibrations you're not aware of. It's worth investigating Mia's room for anything unusual." On the drive home, Emily broke the silence. "What if it's nothing? What if Max is just being overly protective?" Jonathan shook his head. "I don't think so. Max isn't the type to act out without a reason." That night, Jonathan decided to stay up and monitor Maximum. He brought a flashlight and quietly entered the nursery just as Max took his usual position by Maya's crib. Hours passed and nothing happened. Jonathan was beginning to doubt himself when just after midnight Max's ears perked up. The dog growled softly, his eyes locked on the corner of the room. Jonathan grabbed the flashlight and moved closer to the wall. "What are you looking at, Max?" he whispered. He pressed his ear against the wall and froze there. It was a faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a slow Rhythmic tapping. Emily. Jonathan called. Softly, come here. Emily hurried in, her expression concerned. What is it? Jonathan pointed to the wall. Listen. She pressed her ear to the same spot and gasped. It sounds like knocking. Jonathan nodded, his face pale, but from where they stared at each other, the weight of the unknown settling heavily between them. The faint knocking continued, irregular but unmistakable. Jonathan straightened, his pulse quickening. We need to figure out what's causing this, he said firmly. Emily nodded, her voice trembling. What could it be? A plumbing issue, something in the walls. Jonathan grabbed his toolbox from the garage and returned to the nursery. Max stood watch by Mia's crib, his growl soft but insistent. Jonathan started tapping on the wall, listening closely for changes in sound. There's definitely a hollow spot here, he muttered, marking a section of the drywall near the baseboard. Emily's brow furrowed. You're not going to tear the wall down, are you? Jonathan sighed. I'll just make a small cut to see what's behind it. If it's nothing, we'll patch it up carefully. He cut into the drywall, removing a square piece. As the dust settled, he shone a flashlight into the opening. At first, there was nothing but insulation, but then something glinted faintly in the beam of light. What is that? Emily whispered, leaning closer. Jonathan reached in and pulled out a small rusted tin box. Its surface was scratched and weathered as though it had been hidden for decades. What in the world? Jonathan murmured, setting the box on the floor. Emily knelt beside him. He pried it open. Inside were old photographs, yellowed with age, and a few brittle pieces of paper. A faint musty smell wafted out. Jonathan picked up one of the photos, his brow furrowing. It showed a little girl no older than 6 standing in what appeared to be the same nursery. Her face was somber, her eyes hollow. Emily held up one of the papers, squinting to read the faded handwriting. It's a letter, she said, her voice trembling, but it's dated 1946. Jonathan leaned over her shoulder. The letter was brief, but chilling too. Whoever finds this, please take care of her. She's all alone now. I'm sorry I couldn't do more. Emily's breath hitched. What does this mean? Who was this girl? Jonathan shook his head, his thoughts racing. I don't know, but whatever happened, it must have left a mark on this house. They stared at each other, the weight of the discovery settling heavily between them. Just then, Max let out a sharp bark, his body tense as he stared into the corner again. The knocking had stopped, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand up. Emily clutched Jonathan's arm. What now? Jonathan swallowed hard. We need answers, and I think this house is trying to give them to us. The next morning, Jonathan and Emily sifted through the box's contents at the kitchen table. The old photographs and letters were brittle, each one offering fragments of a story that felt incomplete. One letter stood out. It was dated November 1st, 1946, and written in hurried, almost frantic script. She won't stop crying. I've done everything I can, but the knocking, it gets worse every night. I think she's afraid, but I can't protect her anymore. Whoever finds this, please understand I had no choice. Emily's hands trembled as she set the letter down. What kind of knocking? Just like what we heard. Jonathan nodded grimly. It sounds like whatever haunted this house might not have left. Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan contacted the town's historical society. A kind but inquisitive woman named Mrs. Lang answered the phone. The Harper residence, she said when Jonathan mentioned their address. That house has a bit of a history. What kind of history? Jonathan asked, his grip tightening on the phone. Mrs. Lang hesitated before continuing. It was built in the 1920s by the Carmichael family. They were quiet couple with one daughter, Lily, but after World War II tragedy struck, the mother passed away, and the father, well, no one knows exactly what happened. He vanished, and Lily was left alone. A new family moved in years later, but strange reports began to surface. Sounds like someone knocking in the night. Jonathan's blood ran cold, and Lily, she was never seen again. Mrs. Lang replied softly, but people say her presence lingers in that house. That evening, Jonathan shared what he'd learned with Emily. They sat in the nursery, the tin box between them, as Max rested at their feet. Lily was just a child, Emily said, her voice thick with emotion. She must have been terrified. Jonathan looked at the photo of Lily, her solemn face staring back at him. If her spirit is still here, maybe Max senses her. He's not growling at something dangerous. He's trying to protect Mia. Emily glanced at Max, who thumped his tail lightly against the floor. He's guarding her just like he guarded Lily. Jonathan nodded. But why the knocking? What's it trying to tell us? That night, the knocking returned louder and more insistent. Max barked sharply, pacing back and forth in front of the corner. Jonathan grabbed a crowbar and flashlight. If there's something behind this wall, we need to find it. Emily watched nervously as he pried open more of the drywall. Dust filled the air and Max growled low in his throat, his gaze never wavering. Finally, Jonathan's flashlight beam hit something unexpected, a small locked compartment embedded in the wall. It's a hidden space, Jonathan said, his voice tight. Help me open it. With a few hard pulls, the compartment gave way. Inside was a small wooden box, its surface darkened with age. Jonathan opened it carefully, revealing a collection of items: a child's diary, a lock of hair tied with a ribbon, and a single silver key. Emily's eyes filled with tears. This must have been Lily. Jonathan flipped through the diary's brittle pages. One entry stood out. October 31st, 1946. The knocking is louder tonight. Daddy says it's nothing, but I know it's coming for me. I wish Mommy were here. Maybe then I wouldn't be so scared. Jonathan's jaw tightened. She knew something was wrong. She was trying to tell someone to tell us. Emily held the silver key tightly. Do you think this unlocks something? Maybe there's more to the story. Jonathan nodded. We need to keep looking. The silver key was small, delicate, and worn smooth by time. Jonathan turned it over in his hands, his brow furrowed. This key has to unlock something, he said quietly. But what? Emily picked up Lily's diary, scanning the entries for clues. She mentioned the knocking. Maybe there's another compartment or a hidden space nearby. Jonathan looked around the nursery, his eyes falling on the floorboards. The knocking sounded low last night, he said. Maybe it's coming from beneath us. He knelt down, tapping on the wooden planks until a hollow sound caught his attention. Here, he said, pointing carefully. He pried up the floorboard, revealing a small metal lock buried beneath the boards. The box was rusted, but intact, its lock matching the size of the silver key. Emily knelt beside him, her heart pounding. Open it, she urged. Jonathan inserted the key, and with a soft click, the lock was released. Inside the box were faded documents, a tarnished locket, and a single newspaper clipping. Emily picked up the clipping, her hands shaking. The headline read, Carmichael, tragedy, missing girl presumed dead. Presumed resumed dead, she whispered, her voice breaking. They never found her. Jonathan unfolded one of the documents, his face hardening as he read. It's a deed. This house was sold a year after Lily disappeared. Her father signed it over to someone else, but there's no mention of Lily. Emily stared at the locket, opening it to reveal two small photographs, one of Lily and one of a woman who must have been her mother. She's been forgotten, Emily said, tears streaming down her face, left behind by everyone she loved. Max, who had been silent until now, barked sharply, drawing their attention to the corner of the room. His tail wagged tentatively, his golden eyes soft but insistent. Jonathan placed a hand on the dog's head. He's trying to tell us something, he said. Emily took a deep breath. We need to bring these items to someone who can help us understand what's going on. The next day, the Harpers visited Mrs. Lang at the Historical Society. They laid out the documents, diary, and locket on her desk. Mrs. Lang examined them carefully, her expression somber. This is incredible, she said. These items confirm what many suspected but could never prove. Lily Carmichael's disappearance wasn't an accident. Jonathan frowned. What do you mean? Mrs. Lang pointed to a passage in the diary. Lily mentioned the knocking, the fear she felt. It's possible someone, maybe even her father, hid her away to protect her from something or someone. Emily clutched the locket tightly. But why hasn't she moved on? Why is her presence still here? Mrs. Lang looked at them thoughtfully. Perhaps she's waiting for someone to listen to, acknowledge her story, and give her the Peace she never had that evening. Jonathan and Emily returned home with a sense of purpose. They placed Lily's belongings back in the nursery, arranging them carefully near Max's usual spot by the crib. If she's still here, Emily said softly, we want her to know she's not alone. Jonathan nodded, his voice steady. Weck finish what she couldn't. As they settled in for the night, the house seemed unusually quiet, but just as they began to relax, the knocking returned, this time louder, more insistent than ever. Max barked sharply, standing guard, as Jonathan and Emily rushed into the nursery. The sound was coming from the corner again, rhythmic and deliberate. Jonathan grabbed a crowbar and pried open more of the wall, revealing an old, sealed cruel space. The air inside was cold and damp, sending a shiver down their spines. Inside the cruel space was a small dusty chest. Jonathan pulled it out, his hands trembling as he opened the lid. The chest contained a single letter, written in the same frantic handwriting they had seen before. If you found this, please forgive me. I could protect her. I failed, but she deserves to rest. Now please let her rest. Jonathan and Emily exchanged a glance, their hearts heavy. Emily knelt down, her voice soft and soothing. Lily, you're safe now. You can rest. We'll make sure no one forgets you. Max let out a soft whine, lying down beside the chest as if standing vigil for the little girl who had been lost for so long. The room fell into a heavy silence as Emily plots the letter gently back into the chest. Jonathan stood beside her, his mind racing. This has to be it, he murmured. This is why she's been lingering. She needed someone to find this, to know what happened. Max, still lying beside the chest, let out a soft huff, his golden eyes fixed on the space they had uncovered. He seemed calm now, his early attention gone, as though his work was done. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek. She was just a child, whispered. No one should have to endure what she did. We have to honor her. Jonathan nodded. We will. Let's make sure she's remembered. The next morning, Jonathan contacted M. Lang again, explaining what they had found. She agreed to help them organize a memorial for Lily, ensuring her story would be preserved in the town's historical records. We can create a marker in the local cemetery, Mrs. Lang suggested, a place where her name will be remembered, even if her remains were never found. The Harpers agreed, their hearts heavy yet hopeful. Over the next few days they worked tirelessly with Mrs. Lang to gather more details about Lily's life. They pieced together her story, creating a narrative that honored the little girl who had been forgotten for so long. In the nursery, Max's demeanor had completely changed. He no longer growled or barked at the corner. Instead, he spent his time lying peacefully near Mia's crib, his presence a comforting reminder of the bond between the past and present. The day of the memorial arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon. A small crowd gathered at the local cemetery, including the Harpers, Mrs. Lang, and a few neighbors who had heard the story. A simple plaque was unveiled beneath an oak tree, engraved with the words "in memory of Lily Carmichael, 1920 to 1946, gone but not forgotten." Emily stood with Mia in her arms, her voice steady as she spoke. Lily was a child who deserved love and safety, but she was taken from this world too soon. Today, we honor her memory and promise never to let her story fade again. As the ceremony ended, a soft breeze rustled the leaves above, carrying with it a sense of calm. Jonathan glanced at Max, who stood quietly beside him, his golden fur glistening in the sunlight. "She's at peace now," Jonathan said softly. Emily nodded. Thanks to Maximum, he brought her story to light. In the weeks that followed, the Harper home felt lighter, as though the weight of Lily's story had been lifted. Max remained ever vigilant over Maya, but his barking and growling had stopped completely. One evening, as the Harpers sat together in the living room, Emily looked at Jonathan and smiled. "Do you ever wonder why Max started acting that way? Why did he sense her when we didn't?" Jonathan glanced at Max, who was curled up by the fire, his tail wagging lazily. "Maybe it's just who he is," he said. "Maybe he knew this family needed him, both us and Lily." Emily placed a hand over Jonathan. "Whatever the reason, I'm grateful he didn't just protect Mia. He gave Lily her voice back. As time passed, the Harpers often visited Lily's memorial bringing flowers and sharing. Her story with Mia as she grew older, the nursery remained a peaceful space, a symbol of love, protection, and remembrance. Max, the ever-faithful guardian, stayed by Maya's side through every milestone, his loyalty unwavering. And though Lily's story was one of loss and tragedy, it became a beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, light can be found when we listen, care, and protect those who cannot protect themselves. The Harpers never forgot the little girl who had once lingered in their home, nor the extraordinary dog who ensured her story would be told. Together they carried forward a legacy of compassion, proving that sometimes love transcends even the boundaries of time.